Hello, welcome to our very special Zoom briefing with Emily Schrader. Before we start, just a couple of points of order to let you know what to expect tonight. Emily will brief us, and then we'll open the floor to a Q&A session. To take part, all you need to do is raise your hand, virtually of course, and make sure your camera is turned on so that we can see you. We will unmute you, so you have to accept the unmute request and then ask your question. And without further ado, let me introduce Israel Bond's President and CEO, Danny Neve, who would like to say a couple of words before Emily briefs us.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I believe that each and one of us will always remember where have you been on that terrible Saturday on October 7th. It's the kind of thing that we would remember for the rest of our life. And I can tell you my own personal experience on that Saturday. It was about 11:30 p.m. here in New York. And I still have on my iPhone the IDF app for sirens in Israel. So at 11:30 p.m., it was 6:30 a.m., Shabbat, Saturday morning, I got an alert on my phone. And I called my daughter. I called my son in Israel. My daughter lives in Tel Aviv with her boyfriend. Of course, like many Israelis, nice Shabbat, nice holiday at that time. She didn't hear anything. But about half a minute later, she told me that she heard the boom of a rocket, or at least part of a rocket, that fall 50 feet from where she lives in Tel Aviv. And only hours later, her boyfriend, who is an officer in one of our best units of the IDF, already led his forces in those tough, difficult, terrible fights with Hamas terrorists. And we were all exposed to the terrible atrocities that took place on that Saturday. And each day I think, that's enough. We cannot hear more in terms of what else. I can tell you that yesterday, for me at least, it was another record of that. First, I met some of the families of the kidnapped here in New York at a meeting with Israel's foreign minister. I had this terrible story of a 4-year-old kid. His parents were murdered in front of his eyes, and now he is one of the kidnapped people in Gaza alone by himself after they murdered his parents in front of his eyes. And I don't know how many of you had a chance to listen to the special tape released by the IDF spokesperson yesterday. They found on one of the iPhones that was held by one of the terrorists of Hamas, a phone, and by the way, an iPhone that was belonged to one of the victims that were murdered. And on that iPhone, you can listen to an unbelievable recording. That terrorist is calling his parents in Gaza, telling them, "Dad, Mom, you should be proud of me. I have just killed 10 Jews." And his mom is saying, by the way, he said Jews, not Israelis, Jews. And his mom is telling him, "Kill, kill, kill." When my mother, she is a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor. She survived Bergen-Belsen and she lost her entire family. And she is one of the Holocaust survivors that has never spoken about her own terrible experience during those terrible years. When she saw the massacre of the 250 young kids at that music festival, for the first time, she started to speak with me about what happened at that time and the memories that came back after so many years. But at the same time, she said, and which is so true, we were got by surprise. We paid terrible price on that day, but now we are fighting back. And we have a strong and brave soldiers, an army that will enable us to win this war. And I'm sure and I'm confident that we are going to win this war. And if some people think this is only a war between Israel and Hamas terrorist organization, they are wrong. This is much larger war between all those who are seeking to annihilate the Jewish people, all of those who are seeking to destroy the Jewish homeland, and us. And at this time, it's our obligation, Israel supporters, the Jewish communities all around the world, to stand with Israel. And I have to say that what is so encouraging is to see the level of support of thousands of people from all over the world supporting Israel these days. On Israel bonds, hours after the terrible attack started, before we were even exposed to the terrible atrocities, we already started a special campaign to support Israel by making investments in bonds, in Israel bonds. And I will tell you why it's so important. It's so important because the government of Israel have needs of billions of dollars resulting in this terrible situation. From the rehabilitation of all the kibbutzim and places over there, to the emergency organizations, the hospitals, of course, all the defense expenditures that are required for the state of Israel. And Israel Bonds is on the spearhead of that campaign of the state of Israel to raise the necessary funds that the state of Israel and its people have to get in order to be able to fulfill also so many duties and financial needs and requirements. And I'm proud to say again that we have such a great support. In a few days, by the way, only last week, in a few days, we raised $300 million around the world, mainly in the United States, but also in Europe, in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. I'd like to also now ask Sarah Villani, new leadership member in London, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you, Israel Bonds, and thank you, Emily, for being with us to speak tonight. Emily Schrader is a journalist, lecturer, and award-winning content creator, and was recently named as one of the Allgemeiner's top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life. As an American Israeli, her work focuses on sharing real stories from the Middle East, as well as fighting various forms of bigotry in the region. Emily's advocacy work focuses on combating anti-Semitism, promoting human rights, and feminism. She's renowned for her social media presence with a large following across platforms. I've followed Emily's Instagram account, Emily in Tel Aviv, for a while, and I always appreciate her insights, whether she's spreading awareness about women's rights in Iran or fighting misinformation regarding Israel. Her lectures, which are actively sought out internationally, range from an overview of the Middle East to diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings on anti-Semitism to social media incitement and hate speech. Emily holds a master's degree in political communications from Tel Aviv University and currently resides in Tel Aviv. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances, but hearing Emily speak tonight is more important than ever. Emily, thank you for speaking with us tonight. The platform is yours.
Thanks so much. I'm unmuted, yeah? Okay. Always got to check with Zoom. Despite an entire pandemic, I feel like we still haven't collectively figured out when we're muted and not muted. So, but thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm happy as I can be. I'm happy to be here with you guys and discuss a little bit about what the situation is and what I think is going to happen. I'm going to go over the social media conversation and the mainstream media conversation and speak a little bit about the impact of that on Jewish communities and the world generally. This is going to be very different, actually, than what I would normally do in a lecture when I'm speaking about anti-Semitism or any of the other lectures that I speak about. Usually I have a lot of examples to show people, whether in person or on Zoom. And I follow a pretty rigid structure. I'm not going to do that tonight because I want to speak candidly about what's happening on the ground here. I don't know, you probably can't tell from the beautiful wall behind me, but I'm actually in my bomb shelter because so many times I've been doing interviews in the last 2 weeks and the siren has gone off and I have to run with my computer into this room. So I started just doing everything from here in the event that there is a siren that goes off. But basically it's been, as I'm sure you all can attest to and feel as well, it's been a very, very difficult couple of weeks so far. And unfortunately, it's just the beginning. I think this is probably going to be at least several months long. It remains to be seen what will happen and if there will be a ground incursion, and if so, when. I do anticipate that there will be. But I just literally 2 hours ago saw that Israel had agreed to the United States' request to delay. I think the sentiment on the ground amongst Israelis is shock and grief. I spent most of today actually visiting injured soldiers in the hospital. It's been pretty traumatic. And I think one of the things a lot of people outside of Israel don't understand is that the soldiers in the IDF and the first soldiers who responded on October 7th, I mean, they're children. They're 18 years old. One of the soldiers who I visited today joined the army a month ago. And he's already been injured and he's 18 years old and he's in the hospital. It's devastating. It's really, really, really devastating. And as a journalist and an activist, but as a journalist, having to see the images that I have seen in the past 2 weeks, I don't really have words to describe it in any language. It's not an experience I would wish on anyone. And it's not an experience I ever could have imagined either. And I'm saying that as someone who reported on and closely followed the rise, if we can call it that, of ISIS, who has been intimately involved with social media for over a decade and has been tracking the issue of anti-Semitism. The depravity that we have seen from this attack is I don't know, you can hear me, I'm speechless. I truly do not have words. And I do want to urge everyone, if you're receiving some of this content, to be very careful about exposing yourself to that. And I know maybe it sounds silly. I don't need to lecture adults on how to protect themselves, but it really does wear on you emotionally and mentally. And it's very, very unhealthy. It's very unhealthy to look at. And there is such a thing as secondhand PTSD. And so I would urge everyone to not look at things if you don't have to. At the same time, I think the big challenge that we're dealing with in media, as in not social media, but media, formal media, is that the sympathies initially were with Israel in how people were reporting what happened, but we are already seeing that starting to shift. And part of that is because lazy journalism, as for example, we saw with the hospital bombing in which Islamic Jihad fired a barrage of rockets at Israel. One, or at least one of them, fell short and landed in the parking lot of a hospital, killing they're estimating now between 10 and 50 people. However, within, I think it was 15 minutes, the news broke in Reuters, AP, AFP, Al Jazeera, BBC, all of the mainstream media internationally, that Israel had bombed a hospital and that 500 people were dead. Now, as a journalist, I don't know why you wouldn't question this, given that they reported, even the initial reports from Palestinians reported that 500 people were dead and there was a bombing that happened 15 minutes ago. Now, I probably don't need to explain the problem with this to you, but if Israel can't get a final count on how many casualties we have on October 7th, more than 2 weeks later, there's no way that Palestinians were able to count 500 plus bodies in 15 minutes. It's not even logical. And yet they reported it as if it was verified fact that Israel had had an airstrike on a Gaza hospital. And instead of being responsible as journalists, we saw this lie spread like wildfire across the world. The result was riots in multiple countries. The result was attacks or harassment of Jewish people around the world, across Jewish communities. There was a synagogue that was defaced in Portugal. The Israeli embassy outside of the Israeli embassy in Mexico was graffitied with "Death to Zionists." Jewish students across the world have been harassed at levels we haven't really seen since 2021, but I do believe from what I've seen in the reports that I've gotten already that it's significantly worse. And I do expect it to get worse. And that is a result of how the media reported, in particular, that issue. Now, of course, there are other factors involved. It's not just the media, but the media has the power to frame things in a way that isn't inflammatory. And unfortunately, what we see, which is the same problem with social media, is that the more extreme news and the things that make you angry and the things that upset you, statistically, and there are studies about this, they keep you on the platforms or the website or the TV channel longer. And so there is a disincentive for news and especially social media, and of course they're contributing to each other, so it's a vicious cycle, to present things in a very negative and inflammatory way, because that's what gets people to react. Just shifting to social media for a bit, everything that happens in the media or that happens in real life is magnified and dramatized on social media, because everybody has a voice. Everybody has the ability to have an input, and sometimes that's good. A lot of times that's also bad, especially when it comes to issues of discrimination, one group against another, or ethnic conflicts. And of course, that's what we see across social media. We see voices getting more and more extreme based on information and content that hasn't been verified, or sometimes even has been proven false. And then we have an additional factor on social media, which also affects the mainstream media as well, but primarily social media, which is disinformation. Now, there's misinformation, which is someone reporting something or someone posting content that is not accurate. It's not an intentional thing. Sometimes it happens. Everybody does it. If you're active on social media, you have engaged in one way or another or participated in some form of misinformation, I'm sure, even if it's liking someone's post. That's going to happen, and it's something that we should be mindful of and aware of, and double check sources before we're sharing. At the same time, we're also dealing with disinformation, and disinformation is something that is intentional. And the ways that we see that manifesting, especially in social media today, is state-sponsored disinformation. This is something that I've actually dealt with personally, and I'll get to that in a second. But the three countries that we really see a lot of this from are China, Russia, and Iran. And of course, we know that Russia has pushed forward a lot of strategic messaging through social media against the Western world. China has done the same thing. And then Iran is really active, including right now, on the issue related to Israel, on spreading anti-Semitism online. I myself have actually been a target of the IRGC's cyber campaigns, cyber efforts that they put forth. They take it very, very seriously. And the reason that this is a problem is because the Western world doesn't take it as seriously as they should, or at least hasn't. It's starting to shift, primarily in Europe right now. It's starting to shift, but not so not so much in the rest of the world. It's extremely dangerous because you're taking a tool that the intent is to respect free speech and free expression, which are Western values, generally speaking. And the social media is meant to work with people who respect in some way or another these values and democracy. And instead, we're seeing that the values which democracies protect are being used against democracies. So social media today in particular is definitely a threat to democracy. And the solution to that is that legislators, as well as social media companies, need to take a different approach. They're going to need to change the algorithms and their structure in a way that doesn't reward extremist content. And yes, it's going to work against the financial interest of social media companies for the reasons I mentioned before. People are attracted to gore. They're attracted to extremism. They're attracted to things that make them feel something. And statistically speaking, things that make you feel angry or upset are things that you invest in more, that you react to and you're passionate about and you respond to. So this, by its very nature, is a problem in how social media is structured. And it does need to change so that those who seek to undermine democracy and democratic values aren't able to use social media to do that. I think it's something that's pushing a lot of cultural divides in the Western world as well, in a way that's actually artificial. So this is, I think, the biggest problem that we're seeing. Now, when it comes to this particular issue in Israel and what we're seeing, what we see online isn't necessarily an accurate reflection of the majority of what people think. What you see most of the time is going to be more extreme opinions. It's not always, but a lot of times it's going to be extreme voices, because those are the voices that stand out. And as I mentioned, if things stand out, it's because they're saying something different than others, which oftentimes is extreme. Sometimes it's just genius, like when I write something, always perfect. But other times it's because it's extreme. So you do want to be aware of like the bias of social media as a whole. Now, that being said, you're probably wondering, well, why would I even get involved in social media? Why would I be in that fight? And the answer is because if we don't show up to the fight, then we don't really have any say in it. And the starting point of the entire conversation relating to Israel, relating to the legitimacy and the rights of the state of Israel to exist, and what Zionism is, and understanding what that is, and that's a good thing. That's a civil rights movement. It's about identifying and respecting the self-determination of the Jewish people in their homeland. If we don't show up and speak about these things and show the majority of people who do not care, because most people are not extreme, they don't have a set opinion about it, and this isn't the issue they're most passionate about. But if all they ever see are pages saying, free Palestine, the Jews stole land, Israel is killing Palestinian children, Israel apartheid, Israel ethnic cleansing, if that's all they see, even passing on their news feed, then that is something in their subconscious when they think about what's happening in Israel that creates a bias against Israel. So it does actually have an impact, even though the reality is not as extreme as what we see online. The problem is that because the reality online is so extreme, it's also manifesting in person now. And that's because social media platforms and legislators haven't dealt with it or figured out a way to deal with it appropriately. And that's why when you see, for example, in Ramadan, when Hamas, actually also the Palestinian Authority, put out a statement saying that Al-Aqsa was under risk of being destroyed by Israel, thousands of Palestinians came to the streets to riot. It wasn't true. There was no evidence. They just made up rumors, the same way they've been making up rumors since 1929. I don't know if you're familiar with the fact that the Hebron massacre, when the Jews in Hebron were actually ethnically cleansed from Hebron during the British Mandate, and this was prior to 1948, okay? When the Jews were murdered, that was the result of the religious authorities spreading a rumor that the Jews were going to destroy Al-Aqsa. Same thing almost 100 years earlier. And despite the fact that it's very obvious, if you know anything about history, that the leaders in the Palestinian society are using the Palestinian people in order to stir up hatred and incitement against Israel in order to achieve the leaders' political aims, not what's best for the people, it still continues to happen. And a huge part of that is the propaganda war on social media. It's the images of bleeding children or allegedly bleeding children from Gaza, and the frankly lies that Israel is shooting people without reason who are just walking down the street innocently. It's the entirely flipping the script. What the Jewish people have experienced becomes what the Palestinians actually experienced. The Palestinian Authority website, for example, actually used, until it was exposed and called out, they used a photo from the Holocaust to describe the Nakba. They claimed that a photo from the Holocaust was from the Nakba. So this is the type of scenes that we're seeing on social media. And so if that's what's being spread around, especially in the Arab world, in Arabic, it's not really surprising that you see such an extreme reaction on the street from what they're hearing from their leadership, what they're learning from their media, and what the videos that they see on social media. And never mind the fact that many of the videos that are shared in Palestinian networks, including Telegram, for example, which is one of the worst because there's not really a way for them to censor it, this material isn't even from Gaza in many cases. And more than once, just in the last 48 hours, I have seen some sort of Palestinian influencer sharing either a video or photo from Syria. And it has tens of thousands of shares and hundreds, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of views. And all the people who saw it and don't really care and didn't pay that much attention are walking away from that thinking, oh, Israel's killing children in Gaza. And it's not even from Gaza. So we have to push back. We have to comment and to engage, to create content if you have the ability, to share stories that have accurate information about what's happening, to tell the story of what Israel is facing and tell the story of what Israel faced on October 7th. We have to keep talking about it, and we have to compete for that space on social media, because the alternative is that the narrative is completely controlled by the other side. And if that's the case, we're going to face a much stronger opposition and much more extreme starting point of the conversations as it pertains to Israel. So it actually does make a difference when we engage, even if it's small things, liking a comment on an article that has incorrect information or incomplete information about Israel on, the New York Times, for example, can provide a lot of insight to the people who follow that account, even if they don't agree with you completely. If I'm scrolling by something and it seems like a very extreme claim about a conflict I don't know much about, it might catch my attention, and I might look at 1 or 2 comments. I'm not going to read 500 or 5,000 comments. But if I see that the first comment is something contradicting with evidence what the article claimed, or putting the incident about the article in context, then I walk away with a very different picture. And so I think it's critically important that we engage and that we're active and as educated as we can be. Now, does that mean you need to spend all your time on social media? No, of course not. But I do want to encourage all of you, whether or not you're a content creator or an influencer, or you have a lot of followers, what you say and do online can actually make a difference. And people need to be called out, because most of the people who don't hate Israel, if they engage or support some sort of anti-Semitic activity or recently pro-terror, if you point it out to them what the problem is with this, they'll say, oh, I had no idea. But a lot of people don't know that. They don't know what anti-Semitism looks like today. They don't know why it's problematic. And so we have to be diligent. We have to be diligent about engaging with people at first, respectfully and kindly, and assume the best. But at the same time, we have to respond. It isn't acceptable to just do nothing when we see these forms of bigotry popping up, and it's popping up like crazy right now, as I'm sure I don't need to tell all of you. Now, I don't want to speak for too much longer, because I really want to answer any questions that you have, whether it be about social media, about how to engage practically, or about what's happening on the ground in Israel. And so without further ado, I'm happy to take questions if you guys have.
Okay. Emily, thank you. Thank you, Emily. These are trying times, and we're in awe of the work you do. So thank you for that as well. just as you have done, I'd like to open up to some questions. So don't forget to raise your hands, have your cameras on. I will ask you to unmute yourself, and we're going to start with Orly.
Hi, everyone.
Orly, you can
Emily,
speak.
thank you so much for your comments. I really appreciate it. And I've been following you for a long time. And I think you're marvelous and wonderful. I just had a question about, I know that you were at that meeting with the journalists to see that horrible footage. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. Do you think that will impact the reporting going forward for a lot of these newspapers, for the journalists that are, do you think they will be more accurate and actually not believe, shockingly, Hamas material that's given to them?
I think that one of the problems that we're facing with the media is that, and first off, let me say that being in the room, I don't think anybody wasn't crying. Everybody was upset. A lot of people felt like physically ill, including myself. There were a lot of like gasps of horror in response to some of the scenes that were shown, and there should be, because it was unimaginably depraved. At the same time, I think we face a problem that other minority groups are not facing. And I actually did a monologue about this issue. That's very frustrating as a journalist, because this is the only conflict. It's the only group of people, Jewish people, of course, that is constantly having to prove that the discrimination or hatred or violence that we face is real. And there are some, even now, even after viewing all those videos, there are some people who, while the journalists themselves might know that it's true and believe the extent to which this organization is truly evil, there's a lot of people who won't. And the fact that, when I share a story on Twitter, for example, that there'll be 100 comments about, whoa, well, where's the evidence of how do we know that someone was raped? How do we know that a baby was beheaded? Where's the video? Where's the picture? And then if there's a picture, no, that's not enough. Oh, it was AI. Al Jazeera literally did a whole segment accusing Israel of making an AI image of a dead baby. Okay, that's the level we're at. No other group in the world who has faced a genocide, let alone more than one, and pogroms all over the world, and more oppressed than any minority in the history of humanity, no other group faces this. It is only the Jewish people. And this is something that needs to be screamed from the rooftops until people are actually listening, because it's inexcusable. I mean, as a journalist, I cannot imagine speaking to, for example, a Yazidi survivor of sexual violence and saying, well, do you have a video? Like, it would be ridiculous. You don't do those things. And yet when it comes to Israel, the press, social media, individuals, activist groups, even world leaders think that they have a right, that we have to prove over and over and over again that we were actually murdered. Like, do people hear themselves? So I think more than anything for me, this has been the most disturbing response. And we've seen it really, as I mentioned, from all levels of society, government, individual organizations, media. And this is, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. And everybody needs to understand that. And part of that is educating about anti-Semitism, not just in times of war, but in general. And part of that is dialogue and building bridges with other communities. It takes time and it takes a lot of work. And I know that there are organizations doing that, but it's not enough, as you can see. It's not enough. And we definitely have our work cut out for us on this. And I think that sometimes because the Jewish people as a group are disproportionately successful in many countries and have overcome a tremendous amount, there are positive stereotypes that are often twisted into negative stereotypes, such as Jews being wealthy. And this is something that we need to gently and respectfully educate other people, especially other minority groups, about. because just because a certain minority group has overcome certain limitations doesn't mean that they aren't still in danger and that they aren't still targeted. Another example of where we see this is the attacks on Asian communities, especially in the US in response to COVID. So this is another thing. A lot of times Asians are left out of conversations on racism and discrimination because, well, they're fine. They're educated, they're successful, they make more money than the average, white person in the United States, for example. So a lot of people will exclude them from conversations when they shouldn't. This is it's an understandable mentality, but it's something that needs to be called out because it's wrong. And this is something we see with the Jewish community to a crazy level. And part of that is because we have Israel, and Israel bears the brunt of a lot of, at its core, anti-Semitic thinking. But also some of it is just age-old prejudice, and we cannot be silent. I don't think it will ever go away, but we have to continue fighting back against it in every generation, or it's going to continue to crop up again. And that takes a lot of work, and it takes time. And right now we're right in the middle of this battle. We're right in the middle of it. So my hope is that journalists, to answer your question, my hope is that journalists do take that with them and really understand the larger context, and don't take it to the direction of like, oh, well, they're evil, but so is Israel, because they're not the same thing, and they're not coming from the same place. And while Israelis are very emotional and angry about what happened, and you've probably seen and or heard comments that, maybe they should just raise Gaza, these type of comments, which are, of course, wildly unhelpful. I don't believe that that represents even close to the majority of Israelis. And in fact, every time I've seen something like that, I've also seen other Israelis saying, hey, okay, don't talk that way. That's not really what we want. And that's not something you see, unfortunately, that's not something you see in Palestinian society that much. You see the opposite. You see a lot of embrace of terrorism. And of course, there are Palestinians who very much are opposed to Hamas, who are living under this system and don't really have a choice. But at the same time, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Palestinians who support Hamas and who celebrate it and who continue to think that it's a good thing. And I don't think it's fair to put Israelis and Palestinians on the same level in regards to their tolerance for racism and for violence against the other group. There are not targeted killings of civilians, of Palestinians. That is not our aim and never has been. And no matter what media or influencers or whoever say, that myth needs to continue to be called out. Sorry, I'll stop talking. I know someone else has a question.
Next question is from Ben Lee. Ben?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I know you said that, if I open like a social media app, the top posts I'm going to see, some of the top posts are, not reflective of actual society. It's the one that gets the most views, it's the most outrageous one. But as this conflict goes on, as it's gone on for a long time, don't you think that the more extreme, crazy views that get all the views that people see, the more their mind starts to think that this extremist view is now actually a normal view? Because if you've heard 20 people say one thing, then how can 20 people be wrong?
This is the danger of social media. Statistically speaking, I think they did a poll just a few days ago about how many, it was like a political poll in the United States, I think it was, about like whether left-wing or right-wing support Israel or the Palestinians. And the vast majority, I think 3% said that they support Palestinians. Many of them said they didn't know. And that's shifted over the years, depending on what's going on. But so that's why I'm saying that the majority of people in the United States, for example, will support Israel. They don't have anything against Israel. They still understand that Israel's dealing with terrorism, etc. But yes, this is the danger of what we see on social media, is that it presents a false perception of reality, that the video about Palestinians being, killed by Israeli soldiers has 25 million views. Then you're thinking, wow, this is really serious. This is something that's happening all the time. This is a really big problem. We need to do something about this, when in fact, that's not actually accurate. And, the footage isn't from Israel. It could be any number of things. And we see it all the time on social media. And so people walk away with the impression that this is the way the world is, or this is the way the conflict is, when that's not actually the fact. And the thing that's scary about it is that they also walk away thinking that millions of people also think that too, when that's not really the case when you actually get down to the polling. And the more you're on social media and the more you see those kinds of videos and the more you interact with it, the more you will see similar content as well. So once someone starts to take interest in it, they'll get more and more content. And that's how people are radicalized by what they see online. Definitely. It's one of the reasons that we have to continue to engage. I know, I guess Jason has a comment. Or not?
Jason, yeah.
Yep. Hi, Emily. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can't see you though.
It's not working for
Turn your camera.
Yeah, for some reason the camera's not working, but it sounds like you could hear me, which is fine. Emily, just thank you for your comments. Thank you for your time. And also please send our thanks to Yosef and all that he is doing as well. As a young professional, I'm concerned with some of the rhetoric on college campuses, including in Washington, D.C., where I live. Terms like resistance is being used very favorably. How, as alumni of our universities, outside of purchasing Israel bonds and donating them to our universities, can we stand with the state of Israel, stand with World Jewry, and help to change the rhetoric on college campuses, especially with student groups that are starting to get some pretty rough opinions of how things are looking in your backyard?
The situation on campus just this week is worse than I've ever seen. And I'm not even there, just from other people, faculty who are working there. I have friends who are in university who are still working at PhD students, but they're seeing what's happening on campus, and it's crazy. It's really, really, really crazy, extreme to a level that I haven't seen. And that's because there's been a tolerance for intolerance on campus over the years. UK obviously struggles with this. I think more than anywhere else that I've seen, the UK is really problematic, really, really problematic on the Israel issue. But we're seeing similar scenes in the United States right now. We see Jewish students being physically attacked. And when there are extremist comments or threats, the university isn't dealing with them appropriately. You gave the example of resistance. I think that's a great example. George Washington University today in Washington, D.C., they projected glory to the martyrs on the buildings. And the university issued some not very strong statement that didn't even mention anti-Semitism. Yeah, we're against that thing. No, you need to have a zero tolerance approach to these issues, or it's going to get worse. We had a similar incident at USC, which is the school that I went to in California. They had a student senator, I think it was a year or two ago, who tweeted, "I want to kill every MFing Zionist." Word for word, plain English, that's what she wrote. Zero consequences, zero. Nothing happened to her at the university. She wasn't removed from her position, anything. And this is, completely regardless of the fact that the vast majority of Jews are Zionists. And in the United States, there was an executive order on the table that protected Zionism as an identity to be treated. It must be treated the same way as anti-Semitism on campus. And that obviously is not what the university did. So this is something that we need to show results for, meaning we need to hold these universities or companies or organizations accountable. How do you do that? You mentioned one way by donating bonds, but another way is lawfare, legally. If you can't engage, if you're not a lawyer yourself, you can also donate to organizations that are handling cases with Jewish students, or also pulling donations. If you serve on any of the boards, if you're involved with the universities in any way, which is what we saw with Harvard. Harvard's reaction to the attacks on October 7th were widely condemned. I know we saw Batya and Idan Ofer resign from the board of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard over this issue. These things matter. These things matter. And if there are enough people who stand up to it and hold these universities accountable for failing to protect Jewish students, because that's what it is, I think that we will see a genuine change. But there needs to be enough pushback to make that change, and there has to be consequences. We can't have people continue to attack Jewish students the way that they've been attacking them and just shrug our shoulders and say, well, okay, we don't want to escalate it. It's a microcosm of the problem that Israel faces. I saw an interview where AOC did an interview on CNN where the reporter asked her, what do you want Israel to do in response? Because there's, there should be a ceasefire and Israel shouldn't do that and they shouldn't do that and they shouldn't do that. Okay, what should they do? She asked her 4 times and she couldn't even give one answer as to what she thought an appropriate, not even proportional, just appropriate reaction to the attacks on October 7th. So this is sort of what we're dealing with in the same way. You have to fight back when you see something wrong and immoral and unjust in front of you. Silence is complicity. And there have been too many people who are ready to, it doesn't concern me. It's not my problem. I'm not involved in this. I don't want to have complications. I don't want to have problems with the university. All of that is valid. It's valid. But it's still not an excuse. We have to take action, because if we don't, no one else will for us. Sorry if that wasn't very positive, but we do need to engage. We do need to fight back, and the more of us do it, the easier it will become.
Emily, I'm going to add host's privilege to ask you a question myself. So a lot of my friends on social media and in real life as well are basically pretty much all Jewish. So if and when I post, it's more than likely an echo chamber, and everyone's posting exactly the same stuff. So how do we break that barrier of talking to ourselves?
So I think now might not be the best time to try to bridge gaps with other communities. You can try, but you might not be as successful as not in a time of war. But that is part of the answer. Engage with other communities, do coalition events, work with other communities on their social issues, pay attention to what's going on with them, show up to their events, whether online or in person. Engage with the things that other groups are doing who have areas of overlap with Israel or the Jewish community or anti-Semitism issues that you're facing. Does that mean that they're always going to stand up with Israel when they should? Of course not. We see that happening right now. But at the same time, sometimes they do. And I have 2 examples of communities that have been very, very vocal from day one of this conflict. And that is the Indian community, who tends to be very, very pro-Israel. And they also are hugely active on social media, and the Iranians. The Iranians have been incredibly vocal and supportive because I think, unlike any other group of people in the world, Iranians understand the evil that we are facing. Because unfortunately, the attacks that we saw from Hamas and how different they are than even the previous terror attacks of Hamas, they have every fingerprint of the Iranian regime. Even with how, I guess, for lack of a better term, innovative they are in how cruel they are, the things that they're doing, the methods that they even thought would be good to do, the use of Captagon to drug these terrorists, to make them extremely irritable and violent. All of that is textbook Iranian regime. And we know, as more and more information comes out, that they were involved, that many of the terrorists of Hamas actually underwent training in Iran in recent months, that this was coordinated and given the green light in Lebanon in a meeting with high-ranking IRGC officials. And that is why, that's part of the reason why it is more important now than ever before that Israel militarily do what needs to be done to eliminate Hamas's ability to kill anyone else. Hamas does need to be destroyed. And I wish it wasn't the case. I wish we could say, oh, well, we'll just deter them a little bit and then we don't want to escalate. We have to stop Hamas. We have to stop them, because if they are not stopped, they will be stronger than ever before next time. And it could potentially pose an existential threat to Israel, because you have a regime that's pulling the strings on almost all of Israel's borders through their proxy terrorist organizations, and that's not something we can ignore. So now is the time. We have to fight.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I would like to just call on Elizabeth Goodman to give us a vote of thanks for our speaker.
Hi, Emily. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to personally say thank you so much for joining us. As I think everyone on this call has been following all your content and reposting, and obviously this issue is very close to all of our hearts. I hope I speak for everyone in the diaspora and say that we are all with you in mind and spirit, and we really wish we could do more to be there to support you in every step of this horrible conflict. But we really appreciate what you're doing and the battle that you're fighting. And I can't imagine what it means to be on the ground and seeing this live and having to clear your mind to actually report it. But we really appreciate everything you're doing, as with Yosef. He's also been fantastic on social media and a true inspiration for what peace and unity could actually look like.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be here, and I'm happy to answer any further questions that we didn't get to. Feel free to send me a message on Twitter or Instagram or even email. Anywhere you want. I do have a publicly listed email. It's on my Facebook page. So feel free to reach out, and I will do my best to answer you. And thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you at the next one. Bye.